The courtroom smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and polish, that blend of bureaucracy and power that always made people nervous the moment they stepped inside. Rows of wooden benches creaked as spectators leaned forward, curious about the morning's docket. Some came for gossip, others just to kill time. But nobody expected the case that would follow to change the way this town thought about justice. At the center of it all sat Judge Harold Whitman, an old man with a sharp tongue and a sharper stare. His gray hair was slicked back, his glasses low on his nose, and his gavel rested in his hand like a loaded weapon. Beside him, the court clerk Melissa Grant whispered about scheduling, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. When Hobben, the bailiff, called for order, Whitman's tone sliced through the chatter. Next case, State versus Ellis. Heads turned. A tall, lean young man in a plain navy shirt and slacks rose from the defendant's table. Barely 19, Jordan Ellis looked more like a college freshman than someone facing criminal charges. His dark brown eyes were steady, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. "Step forward," the judge ordered, tapping his pen impatiently. Jordan obeyed, his calmness irritating the judge before the boy even spoke. "So," Whitman began, flipping through the file, "you're the one accused of obstructing an officer during a traffic stop. You think you're smarter than the law, Mr. Ellis?" The words carried the sting of mockery. A few people in the gallery chuckled quietly. The prosecutor, Eric Dalton, smirked, already anticipating a routine conviction. Jordan didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor," he said evenly. "I think the law deserves to be followed by everyone." That answer hung in the air like static. The judge squinted. "You've got quite a mouth for someone barely old enough to drive." Jordan met his eye, quite unbothered. "With respect, sir, I'm old enough to know my rights." The courtroom went silent. Even the bailiff, Officer Ray Coleman, paused mid-step. Judge Whitman's thin lips curled into a smile, not of amusement but challenge. "Well, let's see how far those rights get you today," he muttered. The prosecution began its opening statement. Dalton stood, buttoning his expensive gray suit with the confidence of a man who never lost a case in small-town court. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the jury, "this is a simple matter. The defendant refused lawful commands, created a disturbance, and attempted to interfere with a police investigation. He acted with arrogance, believing the rules did not apply to him. We will show that his defiance endangered officers and undermined public safety." He shot a glance at Jordan, expecting to see fear. Instead, he saw patience, almost pity. When it was the defense's turn, Franklin Reeves, a local public defender, with coffee stains on his tie, shuffled forward. "My client was confused, Your Honor. He's young, maybe didn't understand." Jordan interrupted softly. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves. May I speak?" Reeves blinked, startled. "Not a good idea. Son, let me handle." "With all due respect," Jordan said, turning to the judge, "I'd like to represent myself." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge froze mid-motion. "You what?" "I'd like to represent myself, Your Honor," Jordan repeated. His voice was steady, his diction crisp. "I've reviewed the case materials and I'm prepared to proceed." Whitman set his pen down slowly. "You're not serious." "I am." Dalton chuckled under his breath. "Your Honor, this kid is barely old enough to vote. He can't possibly know what he's doing." Jordan turned to him. "Is that your legal argument, Mr. Dalton, or just your opinion?" A few jurors hid smiles. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Ellis, this isn't a debate club. Do you have any legal training?" Jordan hesitated just long enough to make the room lean forward. Some, the judge repeated, incredulous. "Do you know the rules of evidence?" "Yes." "Sir? The difference between cross and direct examination?" "Yes, sir." The judge studied him. The boy's tone wasn't arrogant. It was factual, like a man stating his height. Finally, Whitman sighed. "Fine. The court will allow the defendant to proceed pro se, but you're digging your own grave, kid." Jordan's calm reply, "I'll try to keep the hole shallow." The courtroom broke into scattered laughter. Even Officer Coleman struggled to hide a grin before clearing his throat. Whitman slammed the gavel. "Order." Dalton straightened his papers. "The state calls Officer Ray Coleman to the stand." The bailiff swapped positions with another officer and took the witness seat, raising his hand for the oath. Dalton paced slowly. "Officer Coleman, please describe what happened on the night of March 4th. Coleman recounted the traffic stop, a routine patrol, a vehicle pulled over for speeding, a passenger, Jordan Ellis, questioning the officer's authority. He kept asking if we had probable cause. He was filming on his phone. When I told him to step back, he refused." Dalton nodded dramatically. "So he was interfering with police work?" "Yes, sir." Dalton turned to the jury. "A textbook case of obstruction, no further questions." "Your witness," the judge said. Jordan rose slowly, buttoning his shirt cuff as he approached. His movements were measured, deliberate. "Good morning, Officer Coleman." The older man nodded. "Morning. You said I was recording with my phone, correct?" "That's right." "And you told me to step back?" "Yes." Jordan tilted his head. "Was I standing inside the crime scene tape?" "No, there was no tape." "Was I standing in the street?" "No." "Blocking anyone?" "No." "So when you told me to step back, what exactly was I interfering with?" Coleman hesitated. Dalton objected. Argumentative, but the judge raised a hand. "Overruled." "Answer the question." The officer cleared his throat. "It was a tense situation. We needed space." "Understandable," Jordan said. "But you'd agree there's a difference between needing space and being obstructed." Another pause. "I suppose so." Jordan nodded politely. "Thank you. No further questions." The jury was watching differently now. The kid didn't sound like a defendant. He sounded like someone who belonged on the other side of the courtroom. During recess, whispers filled the hallways. Reporters scribbled notes. One of them, Hannah Clark, whispered to a cameraman, "Who is this kid?" Back inside, Judge Whitman leaned toward Dalton. "You sure about this charge?" Dalton bristled. "We can't back off now. He's making a mockery of the process." Whitman's eyes flicked toward Jordan, who was calmly reading from a worn-out law textbook he'd brought in a backpack. The judge shook his head. Mockery or not, he knows his stuff. The gavel hit again. Court is back in session. Dalton called his second witness, the arresting officer who wrote the report. The testimony sounded airtight until Jordan began cross-examining. "Officer Bennett, you wrote that I raised my voice in a threatening manner. Did you record that?" "No recording." "Body camera?" "Not available." "Witnesses?" "Just my partner." Jordan's voice stayed calm. "So the only evidence of me being threatening is your memory?" "Yes." Jordan nodded. "Would you agree that memory can be affected by stress?" Dalton objected again, but the judge waved it off. The jurors scribbled notes. The tide was turning, and Whitman knew it. By mid-afternoon, Dalton's confidence had cracked. He'd expected a scared teenager, not someone dismantling his case one polite question at a time. Whitman leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Dalton, any more witnesses?" "None for now, Your Honor." "Then we'll hear from the defendant." Jordan stepped forward. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call my mother, Denise Ellis." A woman in a gray cardigan stood, nervous but proud. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and sat down. Jordan's tone softened. "Mom, can you tell the court where I was headed that night?" "Home," she said. "You were coming back from the university library." The judge frowned. "Library?" Denise nodded. "He spends most nights there, studying law." The word echoed. Dalton blinked. "Excuse me, did you say law?" "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "He's been studying since he was 15. Gasps rippled again. Whitman leaned forward. "Studying law? Where?" "At Franklin University," she said. "He graduated last month." Dalton laughed out loud. "Impossible, he's 19. Jordan turned to him calmly. "Accelerated program. Dual enrollment since 12. Silence. Even the clock seemed to pause between ticks. Judge Whitman slowly removed his glasses. You're telling me you already have a law degree? Yes, sir. Graduated with honors. Bar exam? Took it 2 weeks ago. Waiting for results. The room erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Dalton stood speechless. The bailiff's mouth actually fell open. Whitman banged his gavel until the noise subsided. Order! Order in this courtroom! When silence returned, the judge looked at Jordan with a different kind of scrutiny. Half annoyance, half reluctant respect. Mr. Ellis, he said slowly, you've been playing this courtroom like a piano. Is there anything else you'd like to surprise us with? Jordan paused for the first time that day. Yes, Your Honor. One more thing. The traffic stop that night wasn't random. The judge raised an eyebrow. Oh? Jordan pulled a folder from his table and handed it to the bailiff. Inside you'll find records of every stop made by Officer Bennett over the past 6 months. Nearly 80% involved drivers of color, and half of those were dismissed in court for lack of probable cause. The judge glanced through the pages, his jaw tightening. Dalton snatched a copy, flipped through it, and stammered, Where did you get these? Public records request, Jordan said simply. Law allows citizens access to officer stop data. You can verify it. Whitman leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. Well, I'll be damned. The energy in the room shifted entirely. The teen defendant was now the unofficial prosecutor, and the adults in suits were the ones on defense. Dalton tried to regain control. Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the case at hand. Jordan countered instantly. With respect, Rule 404B allows evidence of pattern and practice to establish motive or intent, especially when selective enforcement is claimed. The judge stared at him. You just cited evidence code from memory? Yes, Your Honor. For the first time that morning, Whitman smiled, a real one. Mr. Dalton, I suggest you tread carefully. This young man seems to know his stuff. Dalton opened his mouth to object again, but hesitated. The jury was watching, and for the first time they weren't on his side. Whitman rapped his gavel. We'll adjourn for today. Court will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. He stood. But before leaving, he looked directly at Jordan. There's more to you than meets the eye, Mr. Ellis. Let's see how this plays out. As the courtroom emptied, reporters rushed toward Jordan. He ignored their questions and walked to his mother. She embraced him tightly. You held your own, she whispered. I'm so proud. He smiled softly. It's not over yet, Mom. Tomorrow we finish what we started. From the back row, a man in a dark suit stood quietly watching attorney Leonard Price, a renowned civil rights lawyer. He'd heard rumors about a prodigy arguing his own case, and had come to see for himself. As Jordan and his mother walked out, Price called after him. Mr. Ellis. Jordan turned. Sir? Price extended his hand. I don't usually attend local hearings, but what you did in there that was remarkable. If you ever need a mentor, call me. Jordan shook his hand. Thank you, sir, but now, I think I have to see this through. Price smiled faintly, recognizing the fire in his tone. Then I'll be watching tomorrow. As the courthouse doors closed behind them, the whispers followed the teen who challenged a judge, the defendant who quoted case law, the boy who might be something else entirely. Jordan didn't slow his stride. The day had revealed only the first layer of his plan. Tomorrow he wouldn't just defend himself. He'd expose the entire system that tried to bury him. And for the first time in his long career, even Judge Harold Whitman wasn't sure whose courtroom it really was anymore. Morning sunlight cut through the courthouse windows, spilling gold across the tiled floor. Reporters were already waiting outside, cameras poised, voices hushed in anticipation. Yesterday, a teenager had shaken the very walls of the justice system, and today everyone wanted to know what he would do next. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like an electrical current. The bailiff, Officer Ray Coleman, moved briskly between benches, keeping order. Jurors whispered among themselves. Even the clerk, Melissa Grant, who had seen hundreds of trials, felt a rare tension. Something unusual was about to happen, everyone could sense it. Then the heavy door swung open. Jordan Ellis stepped inside, calm as ever. He carried a single folder under his arm, the same worn notebook from the day before tucked inside it. His mother, Denise, sat quietly in the back row, her hands clasped. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Eric Dalton hunched over his notes, face pale from lack of sleep. He had spent the night combing through statutes, trying to prepare for whatever this kid might pull next. He'd found nothing to predict it. Finally, the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Whitman." Everyone stood. The judge entered, gavel in hand, eyes sharp and tired. He scanned the room until they landed on Jordan. "Mr. Ellis," he said dryly, "still representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." Whitman smirked. "Well, after yesterday's performance, I can't say I'm surprised. Let's see if you can keep up." Jordan nodded slightly. "I'll do my best, sir." The judge leaned back, half amused, half annoyed. "Mr. Dalton, the floor is yours, but keep it focused. This courtroom isn't a circus." Dalton stood, his tone clipped. "The state intends to recall Officer Bennett for clarification, Your Honor." Whitman gestured. "Proceed." Officer Bennett returned to the stand, visibly uncomfortable. The uniform that once represented authority now looked heavy on his shoulders. Dalton straightened his tie. "Officer Bennett," he began, "after reviewing the defendant's remarks yesterday, do you wish to clarify your testimony?" "Yes, sir." Bennett swallowed hard. Mr. Ellis was filming the stop, yes, but he refused repeated lawful orders to move away. Dalton nodded. "And would you say his behavior posed a risk to officer safety?" "Yes, sir." Dalton turned toward the jury. "There you have it. No vendetta, no targeting, simply protocol. The officers acted reasonably." Jordan stood. "Permission to cross, Your Honor?" "Granted," Whitman replied, his tone light but watchful. Jordan approached. "Officer Bennett, yesterday you testified there was no body cam recording because of a technical malfunction. Is that correct?" "Yes." "You're certain of that?" "Yes." Jordan opened his folder and slid a page onto the evidence desk. "Then how do you explain this maintenance log from your department's own system, showing your camera was fully functional on March 4th and automatically uploaded footage that night?" Gasps erupted in the room. Dalton leapt to his feet. "Objection! That document was not submitted in discovery." Jordan didn't blink. "Your Honor, the evidence is from a public records request, time-stamped and verified by the police department's data unit. It's admissible." Whitman studied the paper, then looked at Dalton. "Objection overruled. I want to hear this." Bennett shifted in his seat, color draining from his face. I wasn't aware of that log." Jordan's voice stayed soft. "So your camera was working?" "It appears so." "And you testified under oath that it malfunctioned?" Bennett hesitated. "I believed it wasn't working at the time." Jordan took a step closer, his tone still calm. "Belief is different from truth, officer. Did you review that footage?" Bennett looked down. "No." "Did anyone?" "I don't know." "So we don't actually know what's on it?" The officer's silence was answer enough. Jordan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request that this footage be subpoenaed immediately." Dalton shouted, "This is outrageous." But Whitman raised his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Dalton. The young man's right. Clerk, issue a subpoena for the file." For the first time, Dalton realized he wasn't in control anymore. The judge, once an ally in mockery, now seemed impressed by the teen's precision. While the subpoena order was processed, Whitman called a recess. The gallery buzzed as people spilled into the hallway. Reporters cornered anyone willing to speak. Jordan leaned on a bench near the window, reviewing his notes. Attorney Leonard Price approached quietly, hands in his pockets. "You've got them, rattled," he said with a half smile. Jordan glanced up. "That's not the goal. I just want the truth on record." "Still," Price said, "you're handling that courtroom like someone twice your age. Where'd you learn to stay that calm?" "Under pressure?" Jordan smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how much you can learn by watching people underestimate you." Price studied him. "You're not just fighting this case, are you?" "No, sir. I'm fighting what it represents." Before Price could respond, the bailiff, called everyone back inside. The footage had arrived. Back in the courtroom, a monitor was wheeled to the front. Melissa Grant inserted the drive and the screen flickered to life. Judge Whitman gave a stern nod. Let's play it. The recording showed the traffic stop exactly as described, headlights flashing, wind hissing through the audio. Two officers stood beside a car. Jordan's voice came through clearly. I'm not interfering, I'm just recording. Then, Officer Bennett's voice snapped back. Step away, boy, before I make you move. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jordan's calm reply followed. Sir, I'm on the sidewalk. I have the right to film public officials performing public duties. Seconds later, the footage showed Bennett grabbing Jordan's arm. The camera jolted, then went black. When it ended, the courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air vent. Dalton stood stiffly. Your Honor, we can't verify that the footage wasn't edited. Whitman interrupted. It came directly from department servers. Unless you're accusing your own police of tampering, I'd advise you to stop talking. Dalton's face flushed red. Whitman turned to Bennett. Officer, that's you on camera, isn't it? Yes, sir. And you addressed the defendant as boy? Bennett swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. Whitman leaned forward. Then we've got a bigger problem than disobedience. Jordan sat quietly, hands folded, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, the judge cleared his throat. The court will recess for lunch. We'll resume at 1:30. When everyone began to file out, Dalton slammed his briefcase shut and stormed toward Jordan. You think you're clever, kid? You just embarrassed good officers. Jordan looked up. If good officers lie, they stop being good. Dalton's jaw tightened. You have no idea how this system works. Jordan stood, meeting him eye to eye. Maybe the problem is I do. Whitman, watching from the bench, caught the exchange, and for the first time he didn't see a defiant teenager. He saw a litigator. At a small table in the cafeteria, Jordan and his mother sat across from each other, their trays untouched. Denise finally broke the silence. You shouldn't provoke them, Jordan. You're winning, but you're scaring them. Men like that don't like being shown up. I'm not here to show them up, Mom. I'm here to make them see. See what? She asked softly. That the law doesn't belong to people in robes or uniforms, it belongs to everyone. She smiled sadly. You sound like your father. Jordan looked away, his expression tightening. He believed in the same thing. Denise nodded. He also believed in surviving long enough to change the system from inside. Before Jordan could respond, Leonard Price appeared at the edge of the table. Mind if I sit? Denise nodded politely. Price leaned in. The footage was a turning point, but Dalton won't go down easy. He'll look for anything to discredit you, your age, your education, even your motives. I'm aware, Jordan said. Price lowered his voice. Then it's time you use what you've been holding back. I know you have more. Jordan gave a faint, knowing smile. You'll see this afternoon. Back in court, tension hung heavy. The jury had returned, Dalton pacing behind his table like a caged animal. Whitman sat forward, hands folded. Mr. Alice, the judge said, you've raised serious issues of credibility. The court will allow you to continue. Jordan stood. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call one final witness, Chief of Police Robert Keller. Dalton spun around. The chief? What relevance? Overruled, Whitman said. If the young man can justify it, I want to hear it. Moments later, a tall man in uniform entered the courtroom. His expression was neutral, but his presence alone commanded respect. He took the oath and sat. Jordan approached slowly. Chief Keller, thank you for appearing. How long have you served? 27 years, Keller replied. And how long has Officer Bennett been under your supervision? About 5 years, Jordan nodded. Were you aware of repeated complaints against him for profiling and harassment? Dalton objected, but Whitman cut him off again. He can answer. The chief hesitated. There were complaints, yes. Internal Affairs reviewed them. And what was the outcome? They were closed without discipline. Jordan raised an eyebrow. All of them? Yes. Even the one involving a 14-year-old boy accused of trespassing on his own front porch? Keller's jaw tightened. I don't recall that specific case. Jordan turned to the clerk. Exhibit D, the complaint log, number 47C. Melissa handed it over. Keller glanced at it, recognizing his signature at the bottom. The courtroom murmured. Jordan's tone stayed level. Chief Keller, would you agree that dismissing valid complaints sends a message that misconduct has no consequence? The chief hesitated, choosing his words. I'd agree that accountability is important. So important that you ignored it until today? Keller's lips pressed together. Watch yourself, son. Jordan didn't blink. Respectfully, sir, I'm not the one who needs to. The gallery gasped. Whitman pounded his gavel, but there was no anger in his eyes, only astonishment. The chief leaned forward, clearly agitated. You think you can lecture me about accountability? Jordan looked directly at him. No, sir. I'm not lecturing. I'm reminding you. The badge isn't a shield from the law, it's a promise to uphold it. The chief's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Jordan stepped back. No further questions. Whitman rubbed his temples. Mr. Dalton, any redirect? Dalton hesitated, then shook his head. No, Your Honor. Then Chief Keller, you may step down. As the chief left, the courtroom seemed to exhale. I turned to Jordan, who returned to his seat quietly. Whitman studied him for a long moment. Mr. Ellis, I've presided over hundreds of cases, and I can't recall the last time someone made me rethink my own courtroom. You've made your point clearly, perhaps too clearly. Jordan nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge sighed. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning for closing arguments. I suggest everyone get some rest. Something tells me we'll need it. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters shouted questions, microphones flashing, like sparks. Jordan, how did you learn to argue like that? Do you plan to become a lawyer officially? Are you afraid of retaliation? Jordan stopped at the top step, the evening sun behind him. I'm not afraid, he said simply. I just believe that truth isn't supposed to need a badge. To be heard. His mother stepped beside him, hand on his shoulder. The crowd erupted with camera clicks and questions. But he didn't stay. They slipped through the chaos toward the quiet street where his old sedan waited. In the distance, Judge Whitman watched from his window. He didn't smile, but the corners of his mouth softened. For the first time in years, the law didn't feel routine. It felt alive again. As Jordan disappeared into the crowd, Whitman murmured under his breath, maybe justice doesn't always wear a robe. The courthouse loomed against the gray morning sky like a monument to unfinished justice. Rain clouds gathered overhead, heavy and slow, draping the town in a quiet stillness. It was the third day of trial, and everyone knew this one would decide everything. Inside, the air felt heavier than usual. Even the creak of wooden benches sounded distant. The jurors filed in, subdued, whispering among themselves. A few nodded, politely to Jordan Ellis, who sat calm and collected at the defense table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the bench. Judge Harold Whitman entered moments later. His robe looked sharper today, pressed and spotless as if he had anticipated cameras. The case had become national news overnight. A local teenager, defending himself, dismantling the prosecution and exposing police misconduct, was now a headline. Whitman's voice cut through the tension. Court is now in session. Let's keep it professional. We have closing arguments to hear before the jury deliberates. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Eric Dalton stood, his face a map of sleepless nights. Gone was his confidence. What remained was irritation wrapped in forced composure. Your Honor, he began, I intend to show that the defendant's theatrics over the past 2 days do not change the facts. He interfered with an officer. He was asked to comply and refused. This isn't about his intelligence or his education. It's about respect for authority. He paused, sweeping his gaze toward the jury. If we start allowing every citizen, especially those too young to rent a car, to challenge lawful orders, we'll have chaos. What this courtroom has seen is not courage. It's arrogance dressed up as cleverness. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Dalton straightened his tie. The law doesn't care how articulate a person sounds. It cares about obedience. Mr. Ellis forgot that. He turned to face Jordan, eyes sharp. And no matter how many legal terms he memorized from textbooks, he can't change what he did. Actions have consequences. When he sat down, his pen trembled slightly in his hand. Whitman nodded. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Mr. Ellis, your turn. Jordan rose slowly, the room falling silent. Even the rain outside seemed to wait. He carried only a single page of notes folded neatly in half. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice calm but resonant. The prosecution says this case is about obedience. I say it's about accountability. He took a few steps forward, measured and deliberate. They tell you I interfered with the police, but you've seen the footage. You heard their own admissions. I didn't interfere. I questioned. I didn't resist. I recorded. And in response, I was threatened, grabbed, and arrested. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. That's not law enforcement. That's fear enforcement. A murmur rippled across the gallery. Jordan continued, his tone unwavering. I've been told that speaking calmly under pressure is arrogance, that standing for myself is defiance. But if knowing my rights is arrogance, then every citizen in this country should be guilty of it. He turned toward the officers seated in the back row. I respect the badge. My father wore one. He believed in justice so much that he lost his life chasing it. But what he taught me, the reason I'm standing here, is that the badge loses its power when it stops protecting the truth. Whitman leaned slightly forward, the gavel resting idle in his hand. Jordan's eyes swept across the jurors. Yesterday I asked for footage they said didn't exist. It did. I asked for records they said weren't relevant. They were. The truth didn't change. It was just hidden. He looked directly at Dalton. Mr. Dalton said my actions had consequences. He's right. But consequences don't belong to those who speak the truth. They belong to those who bury it. A few people in the gallery clapped softly before the bailiff called for order. Jordan lowered his tone, quieter now, almost intimate. I'm 19. I've spent most of my life studying laws written by men who believed in fairness. But laws don't fail people. People fail laws. This trial isn't about a traffic stop. It's about who gets to decide when the truth matters. He stepped back from the jury box. You do. He folded his note and set it down on the table. No further argument. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. Even Judge Whitman hesitated before clearing his throat. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. The jury will now retire to deliberate. The bailiff led the jurors out through a side door. The sound of the latch closing echoed through the chamber. For the first time in 3 days, there was nothing left to say. Whitman leaned back, sighing deeply. Mr. Dalton, Mr. Ellis, both of you have given this court plenty to think about. We'll reconvene when the jury returns. Dalton gathered his papers, avoiding eye contact. Jordan simply sat, eyes on the seal of justice carved above the bench, waiting. Minutes turned into hours. Rain tapped against the high windows. Spectators whispered about the teenager who out-argued grown men in suits. The tension was unbearable. Finally, the door opened. The jury filed back in, their faces solemn. Whitman straightened. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? The woman in the first row stood. Yes, Your Honor. Please read it. She unfolded a paper, her voice steady. In the case of State versus Jordan Ellis, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. A collective gasp filled the room. Denise Ellis covered her mouth with both hands. Dalton froze, blinking rapidly as if he hadn't heard correctly. Whitman struck his gavel twice. Order. But the applause came anyway, quiet at first, then louder, spreading through the gallery until even the clerk smiled. When the noise subsided, Whitman looked down at Jordan. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, with something close to reluctant admiration, he said, Mr. Ellis, this court owes you an apology. Jordan looked up, surprised. Whitman continued, Yesterday morning, I assumed you were another reckless kid wasting my time. I was wrong. You came into this courtroom with nothing but knowledge, and you used it with more discipline than lawyers twice your age." He paused, the authority in his voice softening. "Don't waste that. The system needs people who still believe in it." Jordan nodded quietly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge leaned back. "Case dismissed. You're free to go." The gavel fell with a final crack and the courtroom erupted again. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air felt cleaner somehow, the streets glistening under the pale afternoon light. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, their microphones flashing. "Jordan, how does it feel to win?" He smiled faintly. "It's not about winning. It's about reminding people that the law works best when everyone can use it," another voice called out. "What will you do now?" Jordan looked past the cameras, his mother waiting near the car, tears still in her eyes. "I think it's time I practiced what I've been studying." From behind him came a familiar voice, attorney Leonard Price. "Then I've got an offer for you," he said with a knowing grin. Jordan turned. "An offer?" Price nodded. "I run a mentorship program for young lawyers who care more about justice than prestige. After what I saw in there, I'd be honored to have you." Jordan hesitated. "You'd really want someone who just embarrassed half the courthouse?" Price chuckled. "Son, the law needs people who can shake it up. You did that. Come see me Monday." Jordan shook his hand. "I'll be there." Back inside, Judge Whitman sat alone in his chambers. The courthouse had emptied, but the echoes of the trial lingered. He stared at a framed quote on the wall, one he'd stopped reading years ago. "Justice delayed is justice denied." For the first time in decades, he actually thought about what it meant. Melissa Grant knocked softly on his door. "Everything all right, Judge?" He looked up, then nodded slowly. "You ever seen a 19-year-old dismantle a courtroom like that?" She smiled faintly. "Not in my lifetime." Whitman leaned back, a distant look in his eyes. "Maybe the law still has a future after all." That evening, Jordan sat with his mother on the porch of their small home. The cicadas hummed, and for the first time in months, peace hung in the air. Denise looked at her son with quiet pride. "You did it?" He shook his head. "No, Mom. We did. You believed I could even when they laughed." She smiled. "You think your father saw you today?" Jordan's voice softened. "I hope so. He taught me that courage doesn't always wear a badge, sometimes it wears patience." She nodded, her eyes glistening. He'd be proud. They sat in silence for a moment before Jordan spoke again. "You know, this isn't the end. There are hundreds of cases just like mine. People who can't afford representation, people who don't know they can fight back. I want to help them." Denise reached over, squeezing his hand. "Then you start tomorrow. Just remember to rest tonight." He smiled. "Deal." Later that night, Jordan sat alone at his desk, the dim glow of a lamp spilling over scattered legal papers. He opened his laptop to a blank document and typed the title, Community Legal Education Project Proposal by Jordan Ellis. Underneath he wrote, Objective, to teach young citizens how to understand, assert, and protect their rights peacefully. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window. The rain clouds were gone now, replaced by a sky full of stars. Somewhere, his father's badge sat in a box upstairs, old and tarnished but still gleaming faintly under the right light. Jordan thought of it often not as a symbol of authority, but as a reminder of responsibility. The phone on his desk buzzed with a text. It was from Leonard Price. "Remember what the judge said. Don't waste it. See you Monday." Jordan smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't dream of it." Then he closed his laptop, took a deep breath, and let the silence fill the room. The kind that comes not from defeat or exhaustion, but from victory earned through truth. 2 days after the verdict, the small courthouse in Crestview was still buzzing with stories. News vans lined the street where reporters had camped out, filming segments about the teenage prodigy who had embarrassed seasoned lawyers and forced a police department into damage control. Headlines called him the teen who out-argued the Hanin system. Others were less kind, labeling him the smartest defendant in America. But none of it seemed to move Jordan Ellis. He woke early as usual, brewed coffee for his mother, and sat by the window with a notebook open. He wasn't writing about the trial. He was listing names, people who had reached out for help since the story broke. Letters, emails, messages from strangers claiming they too had been mistreated, silenced, or ignored. Some were young, some much older. All of them wanted someone to listen. By the third morning, his inbox overflowed. His phone buzzed with missed calls, one from a number he didn't recognize. When he finally answered, a deep voice said, "This is Judge Whitman." Jordan froze. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Relax," the judge said. "You're not in trouble. I just read an op-ed accusing me of bias because I let you handle your own defense. I thought you should know you made more enemies than friends in this town." "I figured," Jordan said calmly. Whitman chuckled dryly. "You remind me of myself at your age, before I started caring too much about politics. You stood your ground, don't lose that." "Thank you, sir." "One more thing," Whitman added. "They're reopening the department's misconduct cases because of your evidence. You might be called to testify before the ethics board. Keep your notes, and stay sharp." The call ended as abruptly as it began. Jordan stared at his phone, processing the weight of what he'd just heard. He'd wanted truth, now truth was demanding more of him. That evening, attorney Leonard Price stopped by the Ellis home. He brought a stack of folders under his arm, and a quiet smile. "You ready to make good on that promise to help people?" he asked. Jordan nodded. "Always." Price placed the folders on the table. "These are real cases, low-income clients who can't afford proper counsel. Some are small, some serious. I can't let you represent anyone until you're licensed, but you can research, draft briefs, prepare arguments. Consider it training ground." Jordan's mother, Denise, served coffee and watched the two men talk, pride hidden behind her soft silence. Price spent hours explaining procedure and paperwork, patient and deliberate, treating Jordan not like a student, but a colleague. When he left, he said, "You have the instincts of a lawyer and the patience of a teacher. Use both." The next week, Jordan lived inside that work. He read depositions, studied statutes, cross-checked citations, and sent drafts to Price at all hours. His nights stretched long, but the fatigue never caught him. Something in him had shifted since the trial, an awareness that knowledge wasn't power unless it was shared. By Friday, a local newspaper ran a new headline: "Teen Lawyer in Training Launches Community Legal Project." The article mentioned his plan to offer free workshops on civil rights and due process. The response was overwhelming. Within days, the community center offered space, and volunteers began showing up with chairs, notepads, even snacks. The first session drew 30 people. Jordan stood at the front, hands loosely folded, not behind a podium but among the chairs. His voice was calm, deliberate, and confident. He explained how to request public records, how to remain polite yet firm during police stops, and how to file complaints without fear. The crowd listened closely, nodding, asking questions. When the workshop ended, a man in the back approached him, his eyes red with fatigue. "My brother's been sitting in jail 6 months for a charge they can't prove," he said. "No one will take his case. Can you help?" Jordan didn't promise what he couldn't do. "Give me the paperwork," he said. "I'll look at it tonight." Later, as he and his mother packed up the chairs, Denise smiled. "You found your calling, haven't you?" Jordan paused. "Maybe, but it's bigger than me. The system changes when people stop being afraid of it." Over the next few weeks, the quiet town began to change. People who once crossed the street to avoid trouble now carried notebooks filled with legal notes. Families showed up at city meetings quoting statutes they'd learned from Jordan's workshops. It wasn't loud revolution, it was quiet awareness, but not everyone was pleased. One evening, as Jordan left the community center, 2 police cruisers idled nearby. The officers didn't approach, but their presence was enough. They watched him walk to his car. He met their gaze calmly, unlocked the door, and drove away. When he reached home, his mother was already waiting at the window. "They followed you, didn't they?" she asked. He nodded. "Let them watch." I'm not breaking the law. That doesn't always protect people like us, she said softly. He looked at her, his voice steady. It does when we make sure it has to. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time it was Price, his tone serious. They're starting an internal review of Officer Bennett and Chief Keller. 3. State Oversight Committee wants testimony from the person who exposed the data. That's you. Jordan exhaled slowly. When? Next Thursday. I'll be there with you. The hearing was held in the state capitol, a far cry from the small courtroom in Crestview. The room was larger, colder, and filled with officials, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Cameras lined the back wall. When Jordan took the stand, whispers filled the chamber, reporters recognizing him from the viral trial. The committee chair began politely but firmly. Mr. Ellis, you're aware this isn't a court. We're here to review departmental procedures, not retry your case. I understand, Jordan said. I'm not here to argue, I'm here to answer questions. What motivated you to investigate these officers? Jordan met the man's gaze. The truth, sir, and the belief that authority without accountability destroys trust. A pause followed. Someone in the audience clapped once before being silenced. Another member leaned forward. You realize your actions could impact pending cases involving those officers? Yes, but ignoring misconduct impacts every future case. The chairman glanced at his notes, then asked, Mr. Ellis, you're not even licensed yet. What makes you so sure you understand how this system works? Jordan didn't flinch. Because I've lived what happens when it doesn't. Theo. Room fell silent again. By the end of the hearing, the committee voted unanimously to open a formal investigation into the department's practices. Reporters swarmed Jordan as he exited the building, shouting questions. One asked, Do you really think one teenager can fix a broken system? Jordan smiled faintly. No, he said, but one teenager can prove it's not unfixable. Over the next month, stories spread statewide. Civil rights groups contacted him for collaborations. Universities invited him to speak. Price warned him to pace himself, but Jordan's focus never wavered. He wasn't chasing fame. He was building a foundation. One afternoon, he returned home to find a letter waiting in the mailbox, the seal of the state bar printed across the top. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sentence, Congratulations. You have successfully passed the bar examination of the state of Georgia. He sat on the porch steps, stunned. Denise came running when she heard him laugh, a sound rare and genuine. She read the letter and pulled him into her arms, tears slipping down her cheeks. You did it, she whispered. He smiled. We did it. Within days, Leonard Price made it official. Welcome aboard, he said, handing Jordan a card embossed with gold letters, Price and Ellis Legal Defense Group. Jordan stared at it for a moment, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Feels unreal, he said quietly. It's real, Price replied. And it's just the beginning. Soon after, their small office became a beacon for clients no one else would take. Former convicts seeking fair appeals, families fighting wrongful evictions, teenagers charged for minor infractions, all came through their doors, and Jordan, barely 20, treated each one as if the entire law depended on it. Months passed. The investigation into the Crestview Police Department concluded with multiple terminations and a state-mandated oversight program. Officer Bennett resigned before he could be dismissed. Chief Keller retired quietly. The town's newspaper printed a rare headline in bold, Accountability wins. When Jordan read it, he didn't feel triumph, only resolve. There was still more to do. One evening as he left the office, a familiar black sedan pulled up. The window rolled down, and Judge Whitman looked out, expression unreadable. Thought you'd moved on to bigger courts, the judge said. Jordan smiled. Not yet. Still fixing this one. Whitman nodded slowly. You've made a lot of noise for someone who doesn't raise his voice. Sometimes silence works louder, sir. The judge chuckled softly. You're right about that. Keep doing what you're doing, Ellis. Just remember, changing the system will cost you friends. I know, Jordan said, but it'll save lives. The judge gave a short nod. Then it's worth it. The car pulled away, leaving Jordan standing under the glow of a streetlight, briefcase in hand, the faint sound of the city humming around him. He glanced up at the courthouse on the hill, once the place of his humiliation, now the symbol of his beginning. He whispered to himself, "The law belongs to everyone," and walked home beneath a quiet sky that finally seemed on his side. The months that followed turned quiet victories into national conversations. What began as one trial in a forgotten Georgia town had grown into something larger, a question that legal talk shows, college classrooms, and dinner tables were now asking out loud. How did a 19-year-old expose what decades of audits had ignored? Jordan never answered those interviews. He still lived in the same small house, still brewed coffee for his mother each morning, still walked to the modest office he shared with Leonard Price. But the phone never stopped ringing. One Friday afternoon, a call came that changed everything. A woman's voice, shaken but determined, said, "My brother's being held in Jackson County Jail. They say he confessed, but he swears he didn't. His lawyer won't even visit him." Her name was Naomi Reed. Jordan listened carefully, taking notes as she spoke. The charge was serious, armed robbery, the evidence thin, the alleged confession typed but unsigned. Price looked over Jordan's shoulder and frowned. "This one's dangerous," he said. "The district attorney's office will fight hard to keep that conviction." Jordan nodded slowly. "Then we fight harder." The following week they drove to Jackson County, a rural courthouse where reputation outweighed records. The trial was over, but appeals were possible. When they met Naomi's brother, Elijah Reed, through the thick glass of the detention center, Jordan saw exhaustion in his eyes, the look of someone punished not by guilt but by time. Elijah told him he'd been questioned for 16 hours straight without food or counsel. He had asked for a lawyer 5 times. None came. Jordan wrote every word down. Back at the office, he spent nights reviewing transcripts, searching for inconsistencies. What he found made his stomach tighten. The arresting officer's report had been altered 3 times, each revision narrowing the timeline to make Elijah look guiltier. The original timestamps, buried in the metadata, told a different story, entirely. Jordan printed the discrepancies and laid them on Price's desk. "They falsified it," he said quietly. Price studied the pages. "If we prove this, it's not just one overturned case, it's an indictment of procedure." "Then we prove it," Jordan replied. They filed the appeal within 48 hours. The motion caught the attention of Judge Harold Whitman, who, by a twist of jurisdiction, had been reassigned temporarily to oversee Jackson County cases. When he read the filing and saw the familiar signature, Jordan Ellis, he smiled faintly to himself. The hearing opened to a packed gallery. Whitman addressed the courtroom with a tone both stern and curious. "Mr. Ellis, I never expected to see you on this side of the bench again." Jordan stood, voice steady. "Neither did I, Your Honor." The district attorney, a tall man named Greg Holloway, began by insisting the conviction was sound. "The defendant confessed. We have his statement. The jury believed it." Jordan rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Holloway, could you read aloud the line where my client's signature appears on that confession?" The prosecutor flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed. "It's at the bottom." "Please point to it," Jordan said. The courtroom leaned in. Holloway hesitated, then admitted softly, "There isn't one." Jordan's tone never changed. "So the document you call a confession is unsigned. Do you have an audio recording of the interrogation?" "No." "Video?" "No." "Independent witness?" "No." Jordan turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the state's entire case rests on a document they can't authenticate, gathered during an interrogation that violated my client's constitutional rights." Whitman tapped his pen. "I'd like to see those revision logs you mentioned in your motion." Jordan handed them over. Lines of digital code, timestamps, and metadata filled the pages. Each time the report was edited, the time of arrest changed. The final version matches the moment Mr. Reed was already in custody. In other words, they rewrote the story after the fact. The gallery stirred. Holloway's face flushed crimson. That data could be fabricated. Whitman looked unimpressed. It came directly from your department's cloud backup counselor. Sit down. Hours later, after testimony from 2 former clerks confirming the changes, the judge dismissed the conviction outright. The room erupted again. Cheers from Elijah's family, stunned silence from the prosecution. Whitman's voice cut through the noise. Mr. Reed, you are free to go. Mr. Ellis, once again, you've proven that truth requires patience more than power. Outside, Elijah hugged his sister as tears streamed down her face. You saved my life, he said. Jordan shook his head. No, the truth did. News of the reversal spread quickly. Within a week, Jackson County's district attorney announced his resignation. Commentators called it the Ellis effect, a chain reaction of accountability across small southern courts. Law students began citing his cases in ethics seminars. Civil rights attorneys emailed Price and Ellis for collaboration. Through it all, Jordan stayed quiet, refusing television interviews. But pressure was building. Not everyone wanted reform. One night as he locked up the office, he found an envelope wedged under the door. Inside was a note typed in block letters. Stop digging where you don't belong. There was no signature. He stared at it for a long moment, then folded it neatly and placed it in a file marked evidence. The next morning he turned it over to Whitman's clerk with a simple statement. If they're trying to scare me, it's working, but not the way they hope. That same week, a National Civil Rights Foundation invited him to Washington, D.C. to speak about legal literacy. The auditorium was packed. Cameras flashed. He stood at the podium in a plain gray suit, his voice calm and grounded. Justice isn't a profession, he said. It's a habit. It's what happens when ordinary people start asking extraordinary questions. The applause lasted nearly 2 minutes. When he returned home, Denise was waiting on the porch as always. She had saved every newspaper clipping, every letter of thanks. Your father would have loved seeing this, she said. Jordan smiled. He would have told me not to get comfortable. Late that night, he sat again at his desk, surrounded by case files and the glow of a single lamp. He picked up his father's old badge, still dull with age, and whispered, "We're not done yet." Somewhere outside, a train horn echoed through the dark. The world was moving forward, and so was he. Jordan barely slept in the weeks that followed. The little office that once smelled of coffee and printer ink now buzzed like a command center. Calls came from journalists, nonprofits, and even law schools wanting guest lectures. But Jordan ignored most of them. He didn't care about the spotlight. He cared about the stack of new case files piling on his desk. Each one represented someone who had been silenced. Each one reminded him why he started. By late spring, his name was everywhere. A magazine cover called him the future of justice. Talk shows debated his methods, politicians cited him, and yet inside, Jordan felt uneasy. Fame had a way of distorting purpose. Every compliment came with a shadow of expectation. Price noticed it too. Take a breath once in a while, Leonard said one morning pouring coffee. You can't fix every case. Jordan smiled faintly. I know, but I can try to fix one at a time. Price sighed. That's exactly what worries me. The next file to land on their desk came from Atlanta. A young man named Andre Miles had been convicted of assault after a bar fight. The victim was a local politician's nephew. The trial had been quick. The sentence harsh. Something about the record bothered Jordan. The timing, the lack of witness statements. He drove to the county courthouse himself, combing through the transcripts. What he found was worse than sloppy. It was deliberate. 2. Witnesses had been coerced into signing statements they hadn't read. Their original versions, buried in the clerk's archives, told a different story. Andre hadn't thrown a punch. He'd tried to break up the fight. Jordan returned to the office, spread the documents across the desk, and said, "We can prove this was a setup." Price rubbed his forehead. "If you go after the prosecutor who handled this, you're going after power. That man's connected all the way to the state attorney general. Then he should be the easiest to prove wrong, Jordan replied quietly. Within a week, they filed a motion to reopen the case. The media caught wind immediately. Headlines called it Ellis versus the Establishment. Cameras flooded the courthouse steps the morning the hearing began. The prosecution sent in their best, a polished veteran named Richard Langford, confident, sharp, and infamously ruthless. Langford began with charm. "Your Honor," he said, addressing a different judge this time, "the defense wants to relitigate a case that was settled fairly. Mr. Ellis may enjoy the attention, but the justice system isn't a stage." Jordan stood when it was his turn, composed as ever. "Then let's talk about facts, not theater." He presented the original witness statements, the mismatched timestamps, and even a voice message from one witness apologizing for signing what the officer told me to. The courtroom stirred. Langford objected, claiming the audio was inadmissible. The judge agreed on procedural grounds. It was the first time Jordan's motion was struck down. Price leaned in. "We can appeal later. Let it go for now." But Jordan's instinct told him otherwise. He pressed on, trying to pivot to another point, but the judge's patience thinned. "Mr. Ellis, you will follow procedure," the judge said sharply. "I'm trying to follow justice," Jordan replied, the first trace of frustration creeping into his voice. The gavel struck hard. "One more word and you'll be held in contempt." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked. Price whispered, "Sit down." Jordan hesitated, then obeyed. But the damage was done. That evening, news outlets replayed the clip on repeat. The headlines twisted the moment into drama. "Young lawyer loses temper in court." Online commentators dissected his expression frame by frame. For the first time, the public that had lifted him up began to question him. At home, Denise watched the broadcast in silence. When Jordan walked in, she muted the TV. "They'll move on," he said quietly. She shook her head. "They won't. They loved you when you made them feel hopeful. Now they'll test if you can stay humble." He sank into a chair. "Maybe I pushed too far." "Maybe," she said gently. "But even good people stumble when they run without resting." For the next few days, Jordan withdrew from the public eye. He answered no calls, declined interviews, ignored invitations. Then one morning, he found Leonard waiting outside his house. "I talked to Langford," Price said. "He's not your enemy. He's old school, but he respects skill. He told me something interesting. The Bar Association's considering opening an ethics inquiry into your filing." Jordan blinked. "An inquiry? For what?" "They think you solicited evidence improperly. Those recordings, they're questioning the chain of custody." Jordan's stomach tightened. "That's absurd. The witness gave it voluntarily." "I know that," Price said. "But perception is louder than truth in this town. You've rattled too many walls." That week, he sat before the ethics panel, a small group of lawyers, none friendly. They questioned him for hours, picking apart every detail of his conduct. Was he authorized to obtain those recordings? Did he verify the witness's understanding? Did he act independently, or did he use media pressure to influence court proceedings? When it was over, the chairwoman folded her hands. "Mr. Ellis, this committee will reserve judgment for now. But remember, brilliance doesn't excuse boundaries. If you forget that, you'll lose what you've built." He nodded silently, walking out under fluorescent lights that suddenly felt colder. Price met him in the hallway. "They'll clear you," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Jordan exhaled. "It's not about wrong anymore. It's about who they want to remind that the system still belongs to them." For the first time since his first trial, doubt crept in. That night he didn't open his law books. He just sat outside on the porch, the same place where everything had begun, and stared at the quiet street. Denise came out with 2 mugs of tea and sat beside him. "Do you know what I told your father the day he joined the force?" she asked. Jordan looked at her. "What?" She smiled faintly. That every person who fights for justice eventually has to fight it too. Not the idea, the system. It tests you to see if you still believe. He sipped his tea. And did he? He did, she said. And so will you. The next morning, Jordan returned to the office. Price looked up, surprised. I thought, you were taking the week off. Jordan set a new file on the desk. We have work to do. What is it this time? A wrongful eviction. Elderly woman, 30 years in the same house. Landlord forged documents to push her out. Price smiled slowly. You're relentless. Maybe, Jordan said, but I'd rather be relentless than silent. They got back to work, the old rhythm returning. Slowly, the noise of controversy faded. When the ethics panel released its findings 2 weeks later, the conclusion was short and clear. No misconduct found. Jordan read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded once and said, back to court. Months later, during another hearing, Judge Whitman visited unexpectedly, sitting quietly in the back. When the proceedings ended, he approached Jordan in the hallway. You handled that eviction case like a surgeon, the judge said. Thank you, sir. Whitman studied him for a moment. The system tried to make an example out of you, didn't it? Jordan smiled faintly. Maybe. But examples work both ways. Whitman nodded approvingly. Keep proving that. As the judge walked away, Jordan felt something new, a sense of balance returning. Not pride, not relief, just quiet purpose. The kind his father once had. That night he stayed late at the office, finishing paperwork under the steady hum of the ceiling fan. The city outside was winding down, the streetlights flickering on one by one. He looked out the window at the courthouse across the square. It no longer looked intimidating. It looked like a place that could be changed, one case at a time. And for the first time in months, he smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for himself. Because even when the system pushed back, he had learned something vital. Justice wasn't about never falling. It was about standing up again, quietly, deliberately, and refusing to let go of what was right. And that, he thought, was a fight worth staying in. Jordan didn't expect the phone call that morning. It came just after sunrise when the office was still quiet and the air smelled of rain. Leonard Price was already there, scanning briefs when Jordan answered. The voice on the other end was brisk, professional, and unfamiliar. Mr. Ellis, this is Special Agent Laura Monroe, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation into judicial misconduct in your state. You're not under suspicion, but your name has surfaced repeatedly. We'd like your cooperation. Jordan glanced at Price, who froze mid-page. Judicial misconduct? He repeated. Yes, the agent said. Your courtroom transcripts and filings from the Crestview and Jackson County cases are being reviewed. We believe certain rulings may have been influenced by external pressure. We're also aware you've been contacted anonymously in recent months. You might have information that helps us, Price mouthed silently. Careful. Jordan's voice stayed calm. If this is official, send a request in writing. I'll cooperate fully. The agent paused. You'll have it by the afternoon. When the call ended, Price leaned back. You've rattled the state enough, now the feds are rattled too. Jordan nodded slowly. Maybe that means we're finally close to something real. The letter arrived by noon, stamped with the Department of Justice seal. It summoned him to Atlanta the following week to meet with federal investigators. The irony wasn't lost on him. A teenager once mocked in a small-town courtroom now being asked to assist the government. That night, Denise watched him pack. You sure about this? She asked. Truth doesn't stop at county lines, he said softly. If they're cleaning house, I want to help. When he arrived in Atlanta, the federal building towered above him like an unfinished monument. Inside, the agents were polite but distant. The lead investigator, Monroe, met him in a small glass room. We've reviewed transcripts of your cases, Several judges have been named in a corruption probe involving cash favors for expedited convictions. We believe you exposed one node of that network without realizing it. Jordan frowned. Are you saying the officers I exposed were part of something bigger? Monroe nodded. The misconduct you found wasn't isolated. It's systemic. Your trial triggered an audit that's now uncovering falsified data, missing evidence, and unreported dismissals. We need your testimony to connect those dots. He exhaled slowly. I'll do it. But cooperation came at a price. As soon as word leaked that Jordan was aiding a federal inquiry, the backlash exploded. State politicians accused him of grandstanding for Washington. Local papers twisted the narrative. Young lawyer turns on his own state. Anonymous calls resumed, this time angrier. One voicemail hissed, "You think the feds will protect you? They won't." Leonard Price tried to keep him focused. "They're scared. It means you're over the target," he said. "But be careful. The system protects itself." Jordan pressed on anyway. For weeks he met with investigators, reviewing transcripts, explaining patterns of altered evidence. He sat through hours of depositions, answering every question with the same calm precision he'd shown in his first trial. Monroe admired his discipline. "Most lawyers twice your age break under pressure," she told him once. "I've had practice," he replied. Then came the hearing that changed everything. The federal task force scheduled a public session in the state capitol to present their findings. Jordan wasn't supposed to testify, only to observe. But midway through the proceedings, a name appeared on the screen that made him sit up straight. Judge Harold Whitman. The room went silent. Monroe whispered, "We found unusual deposits in an account tied to his court. We haven't confirmed their bribes, but they match patterns from other judges under review." Jordan's pulse spiked. That can't be right. Whitman had been stern, flawed, but fair. The man who once mocked him had become a mentor. He refused to believe it. After the hearing, he confronted Monroe privately. "You're wrong about Whitman." Her expression was unreadable. "If you have exculpatory information, now's the time to share it." "I have something better," Jordan said quietly. "I have questions you're not asking." That night, he drove back to Crestview without telling anyone. The courthouse was dark except for one office light, Whitman's. The judge was alone, surrounded by stacks of paper. When Jordan entered, Whitman didn't look surprised. "I wondered when you'd show up," the judge said. "They think you're part of it," Jordan said. "Tell me they're wrong." Whitman sighed heavily. "They found the payments, didn't they?" "Yes. From a shell account linked to dismissed cases." The judge nodded slowly. "I took the money, Ellis, but not for the reason they think." Jordan's chest tightened. "Then why?" "To protect evidence," Whitman said. "The money came from whistleblowers trying to smuggle documents out of the clerk's office. If I rejected it, it would have disappeared. I used it to build a private archive, proof of the corruption that runs deeper than anyone imagines." Jordan stared at him. "You're saying you took the fall to keep the records safe?" Whitman opened a drawer and slid a flash drive across the desk. "Everything's here. Dates, accounts, names. But I can't hand it over myself. They'll twist the narrative. You're the only one who can use it without losing credibility." Jordan hesitated. "If I take this, they'll think I'm complicit." The judge's eyes softened. "Then prove them wrong again. You've done it before." Jordan pocketed the drive. "If you're lying to me," Whitman shook his head. "I'm too old to lie for survival. Go." The next morning, Jordan delivered the evidence to Monroe's office without commentary. Weeks of analysis followed. When the results came back, her face was pale. "He was telling the truth," she said. "Those payments weren't bribes, they were internal leaks. He risked everything to expose his own colleagues." The press released the story a week later. Judge cleared after evidence reveals secret archive of corruption files. Whitman was vindicated publicly, though his career quietly ended. He sent Jordan a single letter afterward. "Justice isn't clean. It never was. But you made it worth fighting for again." Jordan kept that letter folded in his wallet. In the months that followed, the state judiciary underwent massive reform. Dozens of officials were removed. Training programs were established based on recommendations Jordan helped draft. He declined credit for all of it. One evening, sitting outside his office, Price handed him a newspaper. "They're offering you a seat on the State Reform Committee." Jordan blinked. "I'm 21. Price smiled. "Age isn't the point, perspective is." He read the letter again, the invitation simple and formal. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, "If I join, I'm part of the machine." "Maybe," Price said, "but maybe you'll be the part that keeps it honest." Jordan looked toward the courthouse in the distance, remembering the first day he'd stood there, trembling but determined. Then let's make sure it never forgets why it exists. He signed the acceptance that night. Months later, at the first committee meeting, surrounded by judges, lawmakers, and attorneys twice his age, Jordan spoke last. His voice was calm, deliberate, steady, the same voice that once silenced an entire courtroom. "Laws don't fail people," he said. "People fail laws. And every time we forget that, someone like me will have to remind you again." The room fell quiet, the weight of his words settling like dust after a storm. Outside, the evening light spilled through the glass, turning the marble floor gold. The same courthouse bells that had once marked his trial rang in the distance, softer now, almost hopeful. And as Jordan walked out into the fading light, he realized something simple yet profound. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a long road, walked by imperfect people, made stronger only by those who refused to stop walking. He smiled faintly, adjusted his briefcase, and kept moving forward. Jordan's new title, State Reform Committee member, didn't change the way he arrived at work. He still walked, still carried his same briefcase, still greeted the security guard by name. What had changed was what waited for him every morning, stacks of letters from across the country. Some were handwritten in careful script, others scrawled, on notebook paper, all of them asking the same thing. How can we make our courts fair again? He read them between hearings, jotting notes for a booklet he planned to publish, a plain language guide for citizens who didn't speak in statutes. Leonard Price called it Jordan's second bar exam. At the first few committee meetings, he listened more than he spoke. Senior judges debated budget lines while lobbyists whispered in corners. He realized quickly that reform wasn't about right and wrong, it was about endurance. Yet when he finally spoke, the room stilled. "We can fund new programs and rewrite policies," he said. "But unless we make the law understandable to the people it governs, nothing changes." No one argued. The press picked up the quote, and overnight Jordan became the public face of transparency. Invitations poured in, interviews, university panels, even a primetime feature. He declined most of them. "I'm not a story," he told Price. "I'm just a reminder." That humility drew admiration, but it also painted a target. A week later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single newspaper clipping from years ago, an article about his father's final case. Someone had circled one sentence in red ink. Evidence in Officer Ellis's last investigation was lost under mysterious circumstances. Jordan stared at it, heart pounding. He'd never asked his mother for details. The case had ended just before his father's fatal accident. Now it was back, and someone wanted him to see it. He took it to Price. "Why send this now?" Price frowned. "Because someone thinks you'll dig into it and maybe they want you distracted." Jordan shook his head. "Or maybe they want me to stop before I find something worse." That night, he opened the box of his father's belongings for the first time in years. Among the badges and commendations was a thin folder labeled Morrison, Warehouse. Inside were photos of a burned building and notes about missing evidence. The date was 10 days before his father died. By morning, he'd traced the case number to an unsolved investigation, an arson that destroyed police records tied to narcotics trafficking. The officer in charge of evidence custody back then was now a sitting congressman. Jordan felt the floor tilt beneath him. He drove to Atlanta to confront him. Representative Cole Morrison greeted him politely in a sleek office overlooking the skyline. "Mr. Ellis," he said, smiling thinly. "I've followed your career. Impressive work." Jordan placed the folder on the desk. "This was my father's case. You were the evidence officer." Morrison's expression didn't change. "A tragic fire. We lost good men." "Did we lose the evidence too?" Jordan asked. The congressman leaned back. "You're digging in dangerous ground, son. That file's older than you are." "That doesn't make it irrelevant," Jordan said quietly. "It makes it unfinished." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Morrison smiled again, but his eyes were cold. "Be careful, Mr. Ellis. The past doesn't like being reopened." When Jordan returned home, 2 men in dark suits were waiting by his gate. They didn't speak, just handed him an envelope marked "Confidential." Inside was a non-disclosure order, federal jurisdiction signed by an anonymous magistrate. It forbade him from discussing the Morrison case publicly, pending review. Price read it twice and swore under his breath. "They're locking you out, classic containment." Jordan's jaw tightened. "Then we'll work inside it." The next month, they pieced together fragments of the old case using public archives and Freedom of Information requests. Each lead brought pushback, files missing, witnesses unavailable. But then a retired officer reached out. His name was Henry Calder, one of Jordan's father's partners. "I knew your dad," Calder said when they met in a quiet diner outside town. "He was close to cracking something big, proof that evidence was being funneled out of storage before trials. When he died, the file vanished." Jordan's hands tightened around his cup. "Who was involved?" Calder's eyes darted toward the window. "Higher than anyone knew. He trusted the wrong people." "Was Morrison one of them?" Calder hesitated. "He was the one who signed the transfer logs." 2 days later, Calder's home was vandalized. Nothing stolen, just trashed, warning clear. Price insisted they pull back, but Jordan refused. "They can't threaten everyone into silence," he said. Using the fragments Calder had saved, a single photocopied ledger, Jordan traced the transactions to a private security firm now under federal contract. That link was enough to file a formal request for review through the committee. When the motion reached the legislature, chaos erupted. Headlines screamed, "Reform lawyer accuses congressman of evidence tampering." Cameras swarmed his office again. Morrison denied everything, calling it a desperate attempt by a young lawyer seeking relevance. But the investigation moved forward. 1. Evening, as Jordan walked home, a car slowed beside him. The window rolled down and a familiar voice said, "You don't stop, do you?" It was Morrison. Jordan met his gaze. "Not when I'm right." Morrison's smile faded. "Careful. You think justice is clean because you're still young. It's not. It's survival." "Maybe," Jordan said, "but survival without integrity isn't justice. It's rot." The car pulled away, tires whispering over the wet pavement. Weeks later, the committee released its findings. The Morrison file had indeed been tampered with, and his office was under criminal review. The same article that once mocked Jordan now ran a new headline: "The son finishes what the father started." He visited his father's grave that evening, standing beneath the same oak tree where they used to talk. "You were right," he whispered. "The badge isn't the power. The truth is." Behind him, Denise's voice was soft. "He'd say you inherited both." Jordan turned, smiling faintly. "Then let's use them well." For the first time, the long silence that had hung over his family lifted. The investigation closed, reforms strengthened, and his father's name cleared. But Jordan knew the fight wasn't over. It never would be. As he walked back toward the fading sunset, the courthouse bells began to ring again, steady, solemn, and clear, echoing across a city that was learning, case by case, how to listen. Jordan didn't ask for Washington. It came to him. The letter from the Capitol arrived without ceremony, printed on plain stationery with a gold seal in the corner. It was an invitation, official but unmistakably political, to testify before a congressional committee on justice reform. The same people who once dismissed him as a clever kid with a lucky case were now calling him an expert witness. Leonard Price read the letter aloud and let out a long breath. You know they're not inviting you to celebrate. They're inviting you to test you. Jordan folded the page carefully. Then let them. By the time he landed in D.C., the city was already buzzing. Reporters waited at the terminal. Lights flashing as soon as they recognized him. Mr. Ellis, will you push for national oversight? One shouted. Do you think local courts are beyond saving? Another asked. He said nothing, slipping into the back seat of a black sedan sent by the committee. The Capitol felt different from Georgia, colder, louder, more deliberate. Everyone here spoke in strategies, not convictions. When he entered the Rayburn building, the next morning aides rushed past him with binders and coffee cups. Inside the committee room, cameras lined the walls. A plaque read House Subcommittee on Judicial Accountability. Chairing the panel was Representative Ellen Voss, known for her sharp questioning. She smiled tightly when he took his seat. Mr. Ellis, she began, you've become something of a symbol. People see you as the young man who outsmarted the system. But today we're interested in whether your experience applies beyond your small-town courtroom. Can one person's story really prove systemic failure? Jordan's answer was calm. Stories don't prove failure, ma'am. Patterns do. And I've seen enough to call it a pattern. The room murmured. Voss tilted her head. You're suggesting the justice system is broken nationwide? I'm suggesting it's fragile, Jordan replied. And when a system forgets who it serves, fragility becomes rot. He outlined his proposals. Mandatory body camera audits, transparent case databases, and a citizen access portal for complaints. Some members nodded, others frowned. The questions grew sharper. One congressman accused him of painting law enforcement with a broad brush. Jordan didn't flinch. With respect, sir, he said, a good officer has nothing to fear from transparency. Accountability protects them too. By the second hour, it wasn't testimony, it was an interrogation. They questioned his credentials, his methods, even his motives. You're 21, one senator said flatly. What makes you think you understand a system older than this country's constitution? Jordan leaned forward. Maybe age isn't the measure. Maybe it's how long you're willing to listen to the people it fails. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Representative Voss tapped her pen lightly and said, Point taken. When the session ended, the applause wasn't loud, but it was real. Journalists swarmed the hallways as he exited, but he slipped away quietly, ducking into the back stairwell. At the bottom of the steps, someone waited. Agent Laura Monroe from the FBI. Impressive performance, she said. You just made half this town nervous. Jordan smiled faintly. Good. Maybe they'll start working. She handed him an envelope. The Bureau's formal request. We want you to consult on a national database for court misconduct. You'd help design the reporting framework. Jordan blinked. That's not my field. It is now, Monroe said. You've lived what our analysts only model. We need eyes that remember what it felt like to stand on the other side of the bench. He took the envelope. I'll think about it. When he returned to Georgia, the world had already moved faster than he liked. There were television crews outside his office, invitations to law schools, speaking tours, book deals. Denise watched the chaos through the window and said softly, Be careful, son. Attention is just applause until it turns into noise. He nodded. I'll keep it quiet. But quiet wasn't an option anymore. A month later, his work on the federal database drew him back to D.C. The project was ambitious, unifying case records from all 50 states into a public access system. It was the kind of reform people had only talked about for decades, and it was making enemies. During one late meeting, an older senator approached him privately. You've done remarkable work, Mr. Ellis, he said, voice low. But you're making powerful institutions uncomfortable. If you want longevity, choose your battles. Jordan met his gaze. Justice doesn't need longevity, sir. It needs consistency. The senator smiled thinly. That's what every idealist says, before they learn how this city works. A week later, anonymous reports surfaced online claiming misuse of federal funds in the reform project. Though baseless, they spread fast. Jordan became the headline again. Reform prodigy under scrutiny. Price called immediately. You're being set up, he said. Jordan knew. He could feel it. The old tactic of doubt. He met Monroe that night in a quiet cafe. She looked exhausted. Internal leak, she said. They're trying to discredit the program before it passes committee vote. What do I do? He asked. Nothing, she said. Stay clean. We'll handle the investigation. But silence wasn't his strength. When the committee reconvened to debate the program, Jordan asked to speak. The chair hesitated but allowed it. He stood before the crowded chamber, cameras flashing again. I've been accused of misusing resources, he said evenly. The truth is simpler. Reform costs less than corruption, but it threatens those who profit from the latter. If transparency frightens you, maybe you should ask yourself why. The room fell utterly still. The speech went viral before the session, even ended. By evening, the audit cleared him of all allegations. The program passed unanimously. That night, Price called again, this time laughing. You just shamed Congress into voting yes. Jordan smiled faintly. No, I just reminded them who's watching. Months later, the database went live. Citizens could track court cases, complaints, and rulings across states. For the first time, data that once lived behind sealed walls belonged to the public. On launch day, Monroe sent him a message. History doesn't change overnight, but it just blinked. Jordan read it and looked out at the courthouse square. It was quieter. Now, the crowds had thinned, the cameras moved on. He liked it that way. That evening, he walked home past the same steps where his first trial had begun. The bench where he'd once waited, terrified and defiant, was still there. He sat for a while, watching the streetlights come on one by one. His phone buzzed, a message from his mother. Dinner's ready. No speeches tonight. He smiled, put the phone away, and stood. For the first time in years, the courthouse behind him didn't feel like an opponent. It felt like a promise kept. He whispered to himself, "The law belongs to everyone," and walked into the warm night, ready for whatever fight waited next. Jordan never planned to become a mentor. He thought change came from filing motions and writing laws, not from talking to students barely out of high school. But when the first invitations arrived from community centers, from youth programs, from the same neighborhoods where his father once patrolled, he didn't hesitate. He stood in front of classrooms with no microphones, just a chalkboard and a few rows of restless faces. "I'm not here to make you lawyers," he'd tell them. "I'm here to show you how to speak when someone tells you to stay silent." The words worked better than any speech on television. Kids who'd never been inside a courthouse started quoting amendments like lyrics. Teachers sent him thank you notes. And slowly, the quiet city that had once looked at him with suspicion began to treat him like family. Leonard Price watched the shift with a kind of paternal pride. "You're building an army of thinkers," he said. "Not an army," Jordan replied. "Just citizens who know they don't need permission to understand the law." But the world outside the classroom wasn't quiet. One autumn afternoon, a young woman named Tanya Brooks burst into his office clutching a folder. Her brother, she said, had been convicted of manslaughter after a traffic accident that wasn't his fault. His lawyer told him to take the plea, she said, trembling. But the other driver was drunk. The dash cam footage proves it, and they hid it. Jordan opened the file. The case number made his stomach tighten. The presiding judge was a name he knew too well, Richard Langford, the same prosecutor who had once tried to humiliate him years earlier. Now Langford wore a robe. "This one's personal," Price warned. "He'll see you coming." "Good," Jordan said. "Then he can't say he didn't know." The appeal moved fast. Langford tried to block it, citing procedural limits, but Jordan found the loopholes easily. When the new hearing date arrived, the courtroom filled with reporters again. Langford entered in his robe, chin high, smile thin. "Mr. Ellis," he said from the bench, "seems we meet again. I trust you'll keep your speeches short this time." Jordan nodded. "Only if justice cooperates, Your Honor." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Langford's smile faltered. He presented the dashcam footage, grainy, silent, undeniable. The other driver's car swerved across the line seconds before impact. The evidence had been logged but never shown to the jury. When asked why, the original prosecutor claimed technical failure. Jordan let the footage play twice, then faced Langford. "Would you call that failure or concealment?" Langford's gavel struck hard. "Watch your tone, counselor." "With respect," Jordan said evenly. "This courtroom doesn't need my tone. It needs the truth." The jury didn't deliberate long. The conviction was vacated. The defendant freed. Outside, cameras waited, but Jordan avoided them. He walked, straight past the microphones to the courthouse steps where Tanya hugged him crying. "You saved him," she whispered. He shook his head. He was never lost. The truth just took the long way. That evening, Langford requested a private meeting. When Jordan entered his chambers, the older man was pacing. "You've changed," Langford said quietly. "You're not the boy I once dismissed." Jordan met his gaze. "And you're not the man who once believed winning mattered more than right." Langford sighed. "Maybe we both learned the hard way." He extended his hand. Jordan hesitated, then shook it. The gesture didn't erase their history, but it ended it. Months passed. The national database he helped build became the backbone of public legal access. Law schools cited his reforms. Cities across the country adopted his community. Workshops. Yet Jordan stayed in Crestview, still working in the modest office with Leonard Price's name on the door. Fame came and went. Purpose stayed. One spring morning, a letter arrived, this time from the governor's office. It offered him a judicial appointment. Price read it twice, then laughed. "Full circle. You ready to be the one holding the gavel?" Jordan stared at the letter. "I never wanted to judge people," Price smiled. "You wouldn't. You'd remind them of the law that belongs to them." After a week of silence, Jordan accepted. His first day on the bench felt strange. The robe was heavy, the courtroom familiar, but different. When he struck the gavel for the first time, he thought of Judge Whitman, the man who had once mocked him and later trusted him with truth. In his chambers, he kept two things on his desk: his father's tarnished badge and Whitman's old letter. Above them hung a framed quote, "Justice delayed is justice denied." He had finally made peace with it. Justice was never about perfection, it was about persistence. Years later, at a public forum, a teenager raised her hand and asked, "Judge Ellis, how did you know you were meant to do this?" He smiled. "I didn't. I just knew I couldn't stay quiet when silence helped no one." The audience applauded softly. When it ended, he walked out into the evening air. The courthouse lights glowed behind him, steady and calm. He paused, at the steps where everything had begun, and looked out at the town he'd helped change. In the distance, the bells began to ring. The same deep, steady sound that had followed him through every trial. He whispered to himself, almost smiling, "The law belongs to everyone, always." Then he turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the crowd. No longer the defendant, not just the lawyer, but the man who proved that truth, when spoken clearly and patiently, could outlast every wall built to contain it. Jordan's years as a judge passed quietly at first. He kept his docket light, insisted on plain language rulings, and allowed every defendant to speak for themselves before sentencing. Some colleagues called it unorthodox, others called it compassion. To Jordan, it was balance. He arrived early every morning, same black coffee, same notebook of quotes his father once kept. In the margins, he'd added his own lines, lessons learned the hard way. The law fails when people fear it. Justice breathes only when it listens. He still walked through the courthouse without escort, greeting clerks by name. Students from his workshops often sat in the back row to watch him work. The younger ones whispered to each other, amazed that the man on the bench had once been the boy in the defendant's chair. Then one spring day, something unexpected happened. A clerk knocked on his chamber door. "Judge Ellis, there's a case you might want to review personally. A juvenile, 16 years old, charged with obstruction. The details feel familiar." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "How familiar?" The clerk hesitated. "He tried to film a traffic stop. Officer claimed interference." Jordan felt a quiet chill move through him. "Put it on the afternoon docket." When the boy entered the courtroom, nervous but standing tall, Jordan saw a reflection of himself years earlier. The file read, Tobias Green. No priors, no record, just a kid who'd refused to stop recording. The prosecutor gave a routine statement. "Your Honor, the defendant was argumentative and refused lawful commands. We ask for community service and mandatory compliance training." Jordan looked at Tobias. "You have representation?" The boy swallowed hard. "No, sir. I asked for one, but they said I didn't need it if I just pled guilty." Jordan nodded slowly. "You understand the charge?" "Yes, sir, but I didn't do anything wrong." The judge's pen hovered. "Would you like to speak for yourself?" The boy nodded. His voice shook at first but steadied as he spoke. "I was walking home. They pulled over another kid from my school. I stood on the sidewalk and filmed. The officer said I couldn't. I told him I could. He arrested me." The courtroom stayed silent. Jordan tapped his pen once, remembering every sound of his own trial years before, the laughter, the disbelief, the long wait for dignity. He turned to the prosecutor. "Any evidence?" "Just the officer's report, Your Honor." "Body cam?" "Footage? Unavailable." Jordan looked down at the bench, then back at the boy. "Mr. Green, you did exactly what the Constitution allows. This court finds no probable cause for obstruction. Case dismissed." Gasps echoed. The boy's mother covered her face, crying softly. Jordan leaned forward. "You did nothing wrong by watching. Keep doing it with respect. The law protects you as much as anyone else." After the gavel fell, the clerk whispered, "You just freed another you." Jordan smiled faintly. "No, I just made sure there's one less me." Word of the ruling spread quickly. Journalists called it poetic, attorneys called it precedent, and law students began citing State v. Green as the echo of State v. Ellis. But Jordan didn't talk about it publicly. He only mentioned it once to his mother that evening at dinner. "He reminded me of the boy I used to be," he said. Denise smiled softly. "Then I guess the circle's complete." He shook his head. "Not complete, just continuing." Years later, long after he retired, people still found their way to his porch. Former students, young lawyers, community organizers, all wanting advice. He listened more than he spoke. When they left, he'd hand them a worn card with one line printed across it. "Justice isn't what you win. It's what you protect." One summer afternoon, a young woman arrived carrying a notebook full of handwritten notes. "Judge Ellis," she said, "I'm starting a legal education program at my college. I used your videos as a model. Would you sign my first lesson plan?" He laughed quietly, took her pen and wrote in the corner, "Keep it simple, keep it kind, keep it true." When she left, Denise found him on the porch watching the sunset. "You're still working," she teased. "Just passing it on," he said, as the years faded, so did the noise. The courthouse bells still rang every evening, steady and clear. Somewhere inside, another young lawyer stood where he once had, arguing for someone who couldn't. And in that unbroken rhythm of law and mercy, Jordan's story lived on, not in monuments or headlines, but in the quiet correction of every unfair, ruling in every citizen who learned their rights, in every judge who paused before passing sentence. He had started as a boy mocked for speaking too soon. He became the man who taught others never to wait for permission. And long after the echoes faded from that small Georgia courtroom, one truth remained. carved into the conscience of every person who had heard his name. The law belongs to everyone, always.